Hey y'all, Unbreakable here. It's time for another in our series, Ask Unbreakable Anything. Today's question it was a little more specific, but I wanted to generalize it because I am sure that this person who asked this question is not alone. The question was something along the lines of, how do I get my child to speak to me again? The silent treatment. I'm getting the silent treatment. They don't want to talk to me. Disclaimer time. I am not, nor will I ever claim to be an expert, a mental health professional, or a know-it-all. I am simply a very vocal survivor. I share my experience, my strength, my hope. I share my own toxic traits. I share my ups, my downs, my struggles, my victories. I share me. So the question was, how do I get my child to speak to me again? This person is getting the silent treatment from their 14-year-old. I cannot answer that question specifically because it is going to vary from situation to situation. But what I can do is share my experience with regards to this. Y'all know I am never anything but honest around here. So some of this might be triggering. If something triggers you in this, please take a break, come back and watch it when you feel that you are ready. Having been abused, neglected, and abandoned by all of the parental figures in my life, those were the only examples that I had on being a parent. So often, that's what we rely on, right? How we were raised. And we carry those scars oftentimes when we come from situations such as I did, from very toxic and abusive parent relationships. We oftentimes carry those into the raising of our own children. And probably our parents did the same thing, right? I did a video about this last year sometime. It's probably somewhere on the page, and I know it's somewhere on YouTube, but talking about breaking the generational curse. I carried that toxicity into my children's lives. Again, you're not going to get anything but honesty from me. And I'm no longer ashamed. That's why I speak about it, because I know that I'm not alone in any of this. When I was young, I met my daughter's father when I was 19. We got married when I was 20, and my daughter was born when I was 21. For any of us who are older, we know those ages, you are still a baby. You're still just a baby. You don't know anything. We think we know everything at that time, right? Looking back, do y'all look back ever on those younger years and think, holy cow, I thought I knew everything, and look at me now? The only examples I had were the ones shown to me by my abusive parental figures. And again, not even realizing that what I had endured in my life was abuse, neglect, abandonment. When I met my daughter's father, oh my goodness, somebody loves me. Somebody loves me. Oh my gosh, this is wonderful. This is awesome. This is forever, right? Yeah. The abuse started really quickly, and that relationship was very physically abusive, 3 concussions. When you've undergone traumas, when you've undergone abuse, when you're in the midst of traumas or in the midst of abuse, our bodies can only handle so much. Did a video a while back, done a couple of them, in regards to reactive abuse. Think of it as poking the bear. A bear is humongous. A bear is violent. A bear can rip you to shreds, right? And you hear the old saying, don't poke the bear. Reactive abuse is that. These abusers, these toxic people, they poke us, poke, 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 until we cannot handle it anymore and we react. And oftentimes we react in toxic ways. Oftentimes we react with our own forms of abuse. Not that we are the abusers, because we're not. Our body and our brain are taking as much as it can possibly take to where it becomes overload and we can't take it anymore. If you've ever exhibited reactive abuse, that does not make you the abuser. It does not make you the narcissist. It does not make you the toxic person. It means that you have your own toxic traits that you need to work on. So being in that abusive marriage, my body did all that it could do. Having the experience that I had, how I was raised, my body and my subconscious mind did all that it could possibly do. And oftentimes that overload, that reactive abuse came out on my child. Many times. That generational curse. I was inflicting that onto my child. I was inflicting my own pain onto my child. I was inflicting my own traumas onto my child. My daughter started running away when she was 13. And, I'm lost. I don't know anything about healing. I don't know anything about reactive abuse. I don't know anything about toxicity. I don't know anything. I had not made the associations to who I was at that time. Was completely contingent upon how I was raised, the traumas that I endured. I didn't know any of this. I didn't know anything about abuse at that time, other than this person who was hitting me was physical abuse. That's all I knew, because those were the signs. I saw the signs. I had the medical records. Okay, I know I'm being physically abused. I didn't understand the psychological and the emotional abuse that was going on. I didn't know anything about any of that. So I inflicted my traumas onto my child. And with her little brain at 13, she reacted the only way that she could figure out how to react. And that was she started running away. She started acting out. My daughter left the household right before she turned 16. I believe that's when it was. Because I wasn't around when she got her driver's license, and that was 16. And ever since then, through that first marriage, and then of course on through my second abusive marriage, we never had a good relationship, ever. It was very reactive against each other. She was very angry at her mother. Justifiably so. I own it. I own it. I own the wounds that I inflicted on my children. My son was the miracle from my second abusive marriage. Same thing. I didn't know during that marriage that what I was going through was abuse. I had no clue. Because I've said it before, the physical abuse was very early on that left bruises on me. So once that kind of stopped, I didn't know everything that was going on was abuse. No clue. And so again, I inflicted my traumas on my son. It wasn't until I got out of that abusive marriage in 2019, my out date is January 5th, 2019. It wasn't until I got out and I started my healing that I started recognizing, holy crap, I wasn't the best mom. I did the best that I could with the limited amount of knowledge and experience that I had, which wasn't much, which was so toxic. But I recognized the damage I had done to both my children. Over the years, my daughter's 31. Over the years, There are periods where she doesn't want anything to do with me. She doesn't want to talk to me. She'll unfriend me and block me and, do all of these things, say horrible things, but she always comes back. I understand her cycle. She always comes back. And even now, despite the fact that those are her toxic traits, every time she comes back, she's a little better. Our relationship is that much better. It's been hard for her to accept me setting boundaries. She doesn't want to hear about Unbreakable. She doesn't want to talk about her own wounds, her own traumas. And that's okay. That's where she's at. But the one thing that I found that has helped both my children is that I gave them their voice. I had to tell my daughter I was sorry from the very bottom of my heart for the wounds that I inflicted on her. I had to tell my daughter I didn't know any better, and that doesn't justify it. I caused you trauma. I've said that to my daughter several times. I caused you trauma. And that breaks my heart that I did that. But I gave my daughter her power by telling her anything you want to talk about. Anything. Even if it's hard for me to hear, I listen. I don't try to defend myself. I don't try to justify the actions and the choices that I made, the traumas that I inflicted upon her. I listen. I allow her to process. I allow her to unload. And then I acknowledge it. I validate it. Yes, you're right. I did do that. Yep. You are absolutely right. I screwed up on that. Yep. You're right. That hurt you. When I got out January 5th, 2019, the abuser had already started several years before. Looking back now, I see it clear as day. Several years before, the abuser started brainwashing my child that he would tell him years before that if mom and I ever get divorced, you want to come live with me, don't you? He started that years before. And he was always the Disneyland dad, right? When he was around, when he was not high, when he was not drunk, when he was around, when he was present, he was the Disneyland dad. Solely to counteract me as having to be the heavy, me as having to be the disciplinarian, me as having to be the one to get on my child about doing your chores and behaving right. And I had to take care of everything. That was my job. In the abuser's words, that's why he employed me. Those were his words verbatim. That's why I employ you. In that relationship, after getting out, I realized when I was in the relationship, I recognized that I was angry all the time. It was like sometimes it would come out and sometimes it was just this underlying feeling of just pure anger. And when I started therapy, I told my therapist, I don't know why. I don't know what it is. Now, I started therapy before I got out. And she had to gradually explain to me that what I had endured was abuse. She can't say that right off the bat. Hey, Unbreakable. Hey, yeah, okay. Do you know you're in an abusive relationship? Like, she understood where I was emotionally and cognitively. I could not handle hearing that early on. And it wasn't until we got further along in my healing, further along in my therapy, that she was able to explain to me, and it clicked, the whole theory on poking the bear. Because I couldn't show emotions. I couldn't show that I was hurt. Anger is just hurt. That's all it is. Anger is just hurt. I couldn't show emotion at all because that made me bad. That made me a horrible wife, a horrible mother. That made me the worst person in the world. That's why nobody likes you. Like, I was brainwashed myself. So I was internalizing everything that was going on subconsciously, and my body was reacting and my mind was reacting, and I was constantly angry. And oftentimes, again, with the limited examples that I had from a childhood full of trauma and abuse and neglect and abandonment, that anger oftentimes came out on my son. To the extent that when I started my healing, as I started opening my eyes and recognizing things, my son, again, gave him carte blanche to say whatever he needs to say, told me, Mom, I used to hate you. And I couldn't personalize that. I couldn't deflect it. I couldn't defend it. The only response that I could give my child was, I know, buddy, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you felt that way. I'm sorry I put you through this. I'm sorry that these things happened. I'm sorry that these things played out the way that they had. I'm sorry. And I've had to give my son his voice as well. And he knows he can talk about anything and everything with me. And I'm not going to punish him for it. I'm not going to justify my own toxic traits that were inflicted upon him. I can't. I say it all the time. Healing begins with you. Healing begins with us. And part of that is acknowledging our own toxic traits. Not that we beat ourselves up. Not that, oh, I'm such this horrible person. I'm such a horrible mother. I'm such a horrible daughter. No, we've had enough of that over the years, right? No, we acknowledge our own toxic traits so that we can heal those as well. My children both know they can talk to me and say anything that they need to or want to. Because what they went through that I caused was not okay. And those are words that I've said to them. What they've gone through because of what I caused was not okay. And it was not their fault. I validate my children's emotions. I validate their feelings, even when it's me having to acknowledge that some of them are something that I caused. That's hard. It's hard to sit up here and say, these are the mistakes that I made as a parent, and I own them. But I'm also fixing them. I'm also fixing me. I'm healing my wounds so that my wounds no longer draw blood from my child's psyche. So that my wounds no longer cause harm to my children. The more that I heal, the closer my relationships are with my children. So close. My son recently told me some things that he'll never tell the other. But he felt safe enough, unjudged, uncriticizing. He felt safe enough to tell his mom. My child tells me everything. Everything. Because I've made it safe for him to do so. Because while I may not necessarily agree with the choices that my children make, they know with everything they are, I will never stop loving them. I will never turn my back on them. And I will own my part in their own healing. My son recently told me some things that teenagers don't tell their parents. He'll never tell the other parent, but things that teenagers just don't talk about with their parents. But that's how safe my son feels. That's how loved my child feels. As I said, my daughter has spent so much time over the years not speaking to me. My son spent years hating his mother. A lot of it was my part. A lot of it was the brainwashing that he was having to endure. But the more I heal, the more my children see. The more I heal, the more examples I am setting for my babies, no matter how old they get. So while maybe your child is not speaking to you right now, work on your healing. Because I promise you, it will radiate from you. You will exude your healing. And those around you will start to see it and pick up on it and learn from it. If your child is not talking to you, take a look at your own part in that. If you don't have a part in it, so be it. You do the best that you can. But take a look at your part in the situation. Have an honest conversation with yourself. Stop hiding behind our justifications. I hid behind my justifications for years, not recognizing that it was my own toxic traits that were caused by the traumas that were inflicted upon me, that were caused by the trauma that I was living, that were caused by the abuse that I was enduring. It does not justify the trauma that I inflicted on my children. But it helps me understand it. It helps my children understand it. It doesn't mean that I don't stop apologizing to my children. I don't apologize every single day, all the time. No, I've said my piece. I've said what I needed to say. If they bring up something else they need to talk, I own it. If there's something else they want to discuss, if there's another trauma that comes up for them that they need to unload it, and I had something to do with it, I need to shut my mouth and allow them to process that. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't have boundaries. That doesn't mean that my children are allowed to be verbally abusive towards me, because they're not. I will not tolerate that. But sometimes emotions can be loud. My child knows that. My son knows that more than my daughter, because he's still in the household. My son knows that. We've talked about that. I don't know how many times. Sometimes emotions are loud. When I pick up my son every other Sunday, it's week on, week off. When I pick him up every other Sunday, he verbally vomits everywhere. And oftentimes he is angry. Blood boiling, steam coming out of his ears because of something the abuser and the new abusive wife have put him through. He knows sometimes emotions get loud, and that's okay. As long as you are not targeting or directing it towards someone else, it's okay. It's okay to yell. It's okay to scream. It's okay to let it out. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to cry. It's okay to have emotions and feelings. I had to teach my child that. I had to give him that permission, that validation. I had to teach him healthy coping skills. I had to show him how to have a voice and use it. But every bit of that all began with me. So if your child is not speaking to you right now, the best thing I can tell you that works and worked for me was turning the entire focus onto myself, my healing my traumas, processing, talking with my therapist, talking with other survivors, speaking my truth using my voice, and owning whatever part I might have played in my children's own traumas. It's a hard thing to acknowledge. And I went through a lot of shame over it. But with time and processing and communicating with my children and continuing to show them healthy choices and healthy coping skills and using a healthy voice, by me continuing my healing journey, I don't hold that shame anymore. I don't beat myself up anymore. I don't have the woulda, shoulda, coulda thoughts anymore. I own what happened to me. I own what I did to my children. And I can tell you that I have never had a better relationship with my children. My babies love their mama, and their mama loves them. Turn the focus on yourself. Turn the focus on your healing. Find your voice. Find your power. Find your happiness. Figure out who you are, what you like, what you want. Oftentimes we come from these traumatic pasts. We don't even know who we are. If we don't know who we are, how can we help our children be whatever they want to be or grow into the best version of themselves? If we're not the best version of ourselves, or at least a work in progress towards that, how can we show our children how to do that? It all begins with us. I hope that helps with your question. I hope my experience in some way helps with your question. What's your next question for Ask Unbreakable Anything? Y'all go be unbreakable.